Hello, BookTube, and this is a late video for February Fantasy Stories, FFS, a late video. And the first week for FFS was classic science fiction, and I've read a number of stories out of the big book of classic fantasy, edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer. I didn't get too far into it. I was a bit bogged down with other things, but also uh, I've just had a sort of bad head cold that with my long COVID symptoms and fatigue, it just really threw me for a loop. So my reading was a bit curtailed, but I did get about 5 stories done. I read The Queen's Son, Hans My Hedgehog, The Story of the Hard Nut, uh, Rip Van Winkle, which was a reread, and I skipped out to The Facts in the Case of Monsieur Valdemar by Edgar Allan Poe. The Queen's Son by Bettina von Arnim was interesting, but these, like the first ones, well, the first three anyway, were like fables, fairy tales, that type of thing, a little more horror than I would have thought fantasy, because I'm not, I've never really been a huge fantasy reader, but I thought I would do this. I was hoping to get a few more done to get a little more sort of general fantasy stuff, but I wasn't able to. But I will. I've got the book, so I will continue reading material eventually out of here. But and then the Hans My Hedgehog. Well, it is Grimm, Jacob, and Wilhelm, or Jacob, I guess, and Wilhelm Grimm was a fairy tale. It's very weird. Um, that's for sure. About a boy who has the upper body of a hedgehog and the rest of the body is a boy, and he leaves, but and then he gets married and he just takes off the top part of the hedgehog, and he's a human being. Very weird. And the story of a hard nut, E.T.A. Hoffman, who does sort of weird horror stuff, but this was classed in here. It's about a daughter and a mouse queen that's put sort of a curse on the daughter of a king and queen, and very weird things happen in there again. And then Rip Van Winkle, Washington Irving is Washington Irving, the waking up, sleeping and waking up. Yeah, it's they were good stories. They were fun and to read. But my favorite, like in the Facts in the Case of Monsieur Valdemar, it's fantasy, I guess, in the sense because it's in the way horror can be fantasy as well. So it doesn't. But I do love the story, and I like Edgar Allan Poe, and so it was good chance to reread it. And it's basically a story of a mesmerist, somebody who can um, put people in a trance and hypnotize them. And he was working with this one older gentleman, and he was very, very susceptible to it eventually. And so he gets his consent to mesmerize him, to hypnotize him at the point of death, and see what happens, because nobody has ever done this. So, and the character he was described as sort of, not, a transplanted American. Just trying to find it here. His name, I can't quite remember. And obviously I'm not finding it very easily. Anyway, he was a scholar, and he'd written material in Poland, and there's a really good page 82. So I passed it for some reason. And he, I don't know, I probably won't find this, but the interesting thing is that I am reading with Scott Bryant, Gargantua and Pantagruel by Rabelais. And he says in here that the character that he hypnotizes, you know, had translated book Gargantua into Polish for the first time. So I thought that was a really neat thing. But yeah, so he does hypnotize him on at the point of death, and he does die, but his consciousness, his soul or whatever, is still trapped in the body, and he knows that he's died and that he's dead, and he wants to be released, but they keep him there for about a week or so, and then finally release him, like take him out of the trance. But they weren't sure what was going to happen, whether or not, you know, he would be alive then again, or not. But he just disappeared, and his body just sort of crumbled and to it just disintegrated in many ways. So it's pretty gruesome, but it's typical of again Edgar Allan Poe. But it makes me think, because to me, I would always class that as a horror, sort of, you know, but it is a fantastical horror. There's not supernatural aspect to it, but it's sort of the weird stuff. So I guess it is. It's, even though mesmerism was considered a science, I suppose in some ways you could consider this proto science fiction, but it's, they're not really using science in any way. It's an extrapolation of what you know, could be done or possibly be done with mesmerism, or uh, um, putting someone in a trance, hypnotizing them. So yeah, so it makes me think of what, you know, it is, this has been very good for me as well, because it's made me think differently of fantasy. Because generally, most of the time when I do think of fantasy, I think of, well, it's something that I've not read, which may shock people, but I've not read Lord of the Rings, which is the hallmark of things. But it's just generally it's that kind of thing, because I know the story. I've seen the cartoon that was done from it, the animated version, and I've seen the Hobbit animated version. I've not seen the Peter Jackson films yet, but I know sort of the story, and you know, the and to me, sort of fantasy has dragons in it and stuff, and it's always been, you know, when I see these fantasy epics, it's like, you know, 1,500 page books that go on for shelf after shelf after shelf after shelf after shelf, and it just, you know, purposely drawing this stuff out. And I suppose if it's something that you like, that works, like, you know, you want more of the same in a sense, because it can be comfortable if you like that world and the world building within it. I just don't like, I it never really grabbed me for some reason, so I'd always put it aside. And I have read fantasy, some of it, and but usually by science fiction authors that I liked, that strayed into fantasy. Notably, Clifford Simak with Where the Evil Dwells, Fellowship of the Talisman. There's a little bit of fantasy and science fiction put together with um, um, oh, I can't think of the name of it now. But anyway, there's a number that he did. But there's lots of other writers that did sort of fantasy, and I enjoyed those to a certain extent, but they were shorter, so they worked for me. But the thing is, I never really class stuff like, for some reason, it just didn't click that something like the Edgar Allan Poe would be considered fantasy, or the other horror, sort of early horror stuff, or the fairy tales, which I do like. I never really considered those to be fantasy so much, even though I do know that part of fantasy later was things like, you know, goblins and, you know, trolls and all that kind of stuff, that are the, you know, the fey creatures, the fey people, and that I've always liked that. But you know, and but in the sort of folklorish tradition, and I do know they've been put into fantasy, but yeah, you could call that fantasy, as simple as that, I think. and a lot of myths can be, once it was just sort of like a paradigm shift in my mind that I never gave it any thought. That's the thing. It's like, if I would have given it like 2 seconds thought, I would have come up with it, but I just never did, because I wasn't interested in it. So I went my own way, did other things. So now I definitely will come back to fantasy, or especially some of the early stuff. And who knows what'll happen if I continue? I might get into some of the other bigger ones. And it's something I do want to read is the Lord of the Rings and so forth eventually. So I'm not opposed to it now. So I think this has been very good. It's like the last one is urban fantasy, and I didn't know what the hell is urban fantasy until somebody told me, and I go, oh, okay. Well, I can, it's twisting a little bit, but I can put in stuff like Karnaki the Ghost Hunter, or some other ones like this, that are detectives into the supernatural and ghosts, but they're Victorian, late Victorian, or Edwardian, and that works for me. But I never thought of it as that. I just thought of it as sort of supernatural horror detective again. I never thought of it as fantasy, but now I can say yes, I do like some fantasy, and I like some fantasy a lot. So, and then, well, anyway, next week, or this week, actually, I should say, week 2 is Sword and Sorcery. Now, I'm going to be reading a bit. I'm not going to, there's no way I'm going to get through this in the next few days. I hope that I can do a video on Sunday, but we'll see how things go. Because I'll get read as much as I can, the short stories in here, several of them. And it'll be a nice reacquainting myself with Conan, because I've never read the original, and these are apparently the original stories. Yeah, here are the timeless tales. I think these are the original adventures of the greatest sword and sorcery hero of all time. And these, and the ones that I read were sort of the lengthened ones by what is it? L. Sprague de Camp, and I think Lynn Carter did some as well. I'd read some of those, and I didn't dislike them. I always thought of that as fantasy. So, but it just I never pursued it. So it'll be nice getting back to the originals and see what they're like, because I don't think I might have read a few. I might have come across a few at some point, but definitely this will be sort of digging into them a little bit afresh. Let's put it that way. So, and I hope to be back, as I say, Sunday or maybe Monday or Tuesday with another video, but hopefully Sunday I'll be able to get another video done. And I hope everybody's enjoying February Fantasy Stories Month. And as I say, it's been a bit of an eye opener for me, and I'm really glad. I wasn't going to do it, and then I hummed and hawed and figured, okay, well, I might read a few things, and then it turned out that will go with it. So anyway, BookTube, I will see you next time.